What if the biggest battle of House of the Dragon Season 3 is not fought with dragons, but with secrets? Because by episode 6, the war between Rhaenyra and Aegon may reach a point where everyone realizes the same terrifying truth. Winning the Iron Throne does not mean surviving it. The same choices that destroy the Targaryen dynasty in House of the Dragon will eventually create the world we see centuries later in Game of Thrones. The dragons are getting closer to extinction. The families who once ruled the Seven Kingdoms are slowly destroying themselves from the inside. And hidden inside the events of Season 3 could be the biggest connections to Game of Thrones ever revealed. From the fall of powerful houses to the rise of characters who will shape Westeros forever, Episode 6 could secretly be setting up the future we already know. Because the real question is not who will sit on the Iron Throne. The real question is, how much of the Targaryen legacy will still be alive when the war finally ends? One of the most interesting things about House of the Dragon is that the audience already knows the final destination. We know the Targaryens will eventually lose their dragons. We know their family will become a shadow of what it once was. And we know that hundreds of years later, characters like Daenerys Targaryen will try to rebuild the legacy that this generation destroyed. But the tragedy is watching exactly how it happens. Season 3 is expected to push the Dance of the Dragons into a darker phase. The conflict is no longer just about Rhaenyra and Aegon fighting for a crown. It has become a war where every victory creates another disaster. And Episode 6 could represent the moment when the war stops feeling like a family conflict and starts becoming a historical catastrophe. Because both sides are beginning to make the same mistake. They believe dragons are the solution. But dragons are actually the reason everything is falling apart. This is the biggest connection to Game of Thrones. In the original series, Daenerys believes that having dragons makes her unstoppable. She sees them as the symbol of her family's greatness. But House of the Dragon shows the audience the other side of that story. The Targaryens did not lose power because they were weak. They lost power because they had too much power and believed nobody could challenge them. The same creature that allowed Aegon the Conqueror to unite Westeros becomes the weapon that destroys his own descendants. And Episode 6 could show another major step toward that downfall. Rhaenyra's biggest challenge is not only defeating Aegon. It is proving that she is different from every ruler before her. But the longer the war continues, the harder that becomes. She is slowly being pushed into making choices that her younger self would never have accepted. This is something we have already seen throughout the story. Rhaenyra once wanted peace. She wanted to avoid unnecessary bloodshed. She wanted to rule as the rightful heir, without becoming a monster. But war changes people. And this connects directly to Game of Thrones because we see a similar transformation with characters like Daenerys. Daenerys begins her journey believing she will be a different type of ruler. She wants to break the wheel and create a better world. But eventually, the pressure of power, betrayal, and revenge begins changing her. House of the Dragon is showing us the beginning of that cycle. The Targaryens are not destroyed by enemies outside their family. They are destroyed by the choices they make while fighting each other. Another important connection is the future of House Stark. Many viewers focus on the dragons, but the political consequences of this war will shape every major house in Westeros. During the Dance of Dragons, the North plays a crucial role, and the decisions made during this period help explain why House Stark remains one of the most respected families centuries later. The idea of honor versus ambition becomes one of the biggest themes connecting both shows. The Starks believe loyalty and duty matter more than personal gain. The Targaryens believe destiny gives them the right to rule. And the conflict between these ideas eventually defines the entire history of Westeros. This is why the events of Season 3 are so important. Every battle is not just about who wins today. It is about creating the world that future generations will inherit. And there is another major mystery that could become even more important in Episode 6. The prophecy. The Song of Ice and Fire. The secret passed down through generations of Targaryen rulers. In Game of Thrones, this prophecy becomes connected to the fight against the Night King and the threat from the north. But House of the Dragon has shown us that this knowledge was not just a random legend. It was a responsibility. Aegon the Conqueror believed the Targaryens had a purpose beyond ruling Westeros. But the tragedy is that the family chosen to protect the realm becomes too distracted fighting for the throne. The prophecy says a Targaryen must unite the realm against darkness. Instead, they divide it. And that contradiction may be the greatest tragedy of the entire story. As Season 3 continues, the question becomes, will anyone in this generation truly understand what their family was meant to do? Or will they continue destroying each other while ignoring the greater threat waiting beyond the walls of Westeros? Because history has already shown us the answer. The Targaryens may win battles. They may claim castles. They may ride the most powerful creatures in the world. But they're slowly losing something much more important, their future. The most dangerous part of the Dance of Dragons is that the people fighting this war believe they are controlling history. But history is actually controlling them. By episode 6 of House of the Dragon Season 3, the balance of power could begin shifting in ways that completely change the future of Westeros. The characters who once seemed like side players may become the people who decide the fate of the realm. And this is where the story begins connecting even more deeply with Game of Thrones. Because the fall of the Targaryens does not happen overnight. It happens because new powers rise from the destruction they leave behind. One of the biggest examples is House Hightower. When House of the Dragon begins, the Hightowers are one of the most powerful families in Westeros. They are wealthy, respected, and deeply connected to the faith of the Seven. But their involvement in the Targaryen Civil War changes everything. Unlike the Targaryens, the Hightowers understand something very important. Dragons can destroy armies. But influence, information, and alliances can destroy kingdoms. This is exactly why characters like Otto Hightower are so dangerous. He understands that winning a war is not only about defeating your enemy on the battlefield. It is about controlling the story people believe. This connects directly to Game of Thrones, where characters like Varys and Littlefinger use information as their greatest weapon. They do not have dragons. They do not command massive armies. But they understand something that many warriors do not. Power is not only held by those who sit on the throne. Power belongs to those who can influence the people around it. And as the Dance of Dragons continues, we may see more characters using this strategy. Another major connection is the future of House Lannister. In Game of Thrones, the Lannisters become one of the most influential families in Westeros. Their wealth, political intelligence, and ambition allow them to control the Iron Throne for years. But House of the Dragon shows a much earlier version of this world. The Lannisters are not yet the dominant force we know from Game of Thrones. They are still building their reputation. The choices they make during the Dance of Dragons help shape their future identity. Because the Lannisters have always understood one thing: a family survives not by being the strongest, but by knowing when to choose the winning side. This same philosophy later defines characters like Tywin Lannister. Tywin is not a great warrior because of physical strength. He is powerful because he understands politics. And the seeds of that mindset can be seen during this era. But perhaps the most important future connection is the decline of the dragons themselves. The Dance of Dragons is not just a war between two queens and two kings. It is the beginning of the end of the dragons in Westeros. At the start of the Targaryen dynasty, dragons are almost unstoppable. They are symbols of divine power. They are the reason other kingdoms fear the Targaryens. But by the end of this conflict, dragons become something different. They become weapons of destruction that even their own riders cannot fully control. And this creates one of the biggest mysteries connecting to Game of Thrones. Why did the dragons disappear? For centuries, people believed dragons were simply gone forever. But House of the Dragon shows us that their extinction was not because they were weak. It was because humans destroyed the conditions that allowed them to survive. The Targaryens did not lose their dragons because enemies killed them all. They lost them because their own war burned through the very creatures that gave them power. This makes Daenerys' story in Game of Thrones even more tragic. When she brings dragons back into the world, she believes she is restoring something beautiful. But the audience now understands the hidden danger. Dragons were never just symbols of freedom. They were symbols of uncontrollable power. And House of the Dragon is showing us why the world eventually learned to fear them. Another fascinating connection is the role of prophecy and destiny. Throughout the story, many Targaryens believe they are chosen. They believe blood gives them a special connection to greatness. But the Dance of Dragons challenges that belief. Because having the blood of dragons does not make someone wise. It does not make someone peaceful. It does not make someone worthy. The Targaryens are constantly forced to answer the same question. Are they ruling because they are meant to? Or because they simply believe they deserve to? This question becomes extremely important when comparing Rhaenyra with Daenerys. Both women are connected by blood. Both believe they have a rightful claim. Both face enemies who underestimate them. But their biggest enemy is not another ruler. It is the burden of expectation placed on them. The world expects them to be saviors. But sometimes the weight of being a chosen one creates the very destruction they are trying to prevent. And that is what makes episode 6 potentially one of the most important chapters of season 3. Because the war is not only deciding who wins the Iron Throne. It is deciding what kind of world will exist after the dragons are gone. A world where families like the Starks, Lannisters, and Baratheons will rise. A world where the Targaryen name will become a legend instead of a living empire. And the most painful part is that the people causing this change do not realize they are creating the future they think they are fighting against. The most shocking thing about the Dance of Dragons is that nobody truly wins. The Targaryens fight for years believing that one side will finally stand above the other. They believe that if they capture the throne, defeat their enemies, and destroy the opposition, everything will return to normal. But the truth is much darker. The war itself is the enemy. Because every dragon lost, every noble killed, and every alliance broken pushes House Targaryen closer to the downfall we eventually see in Game of Thrones. And this is why Season 3 Episode 6 could be such an important turning point. The audience already knows the ending of the Targaryen dynasty. But what makes this story fascinating is watching the small decisions that create that ending. One of the biggest themes connecting House of the Dragon to Game of Thrones is the idea that power always demands a price. The Iron Throne is not just a chair made of swords. It is a symbol of everything people sacrifice to control it. In Game of Thrones, we see characters lose their families, their morality, and sometimes their humanity because of their desire for power. Ned Stark loses his life because he refuses to compromise his values. Robb Stark loses his kingdom because he underestimates political consequences. Cersei Lannister destroys almost everything around her because she believes power is the only thing that matters. And House of the Dragon shows where this cycle begins. The Targaryens create the same dangerous game that later destroys many other families. They teach Westeros that the throne can be taken through ambition, fear, and violence. But they also prove something important. Even the strongest family in history can destroy itself. Another major connection is the changing relationship between humans and dragons. In the beginning, dragons represent the greatness of House Targaryen. They are almost like living gods. But by the end of the dance, dragons become reminders of the damage caused by unchecked power. This connects directly to the final seasons of Game of Thrones. When Daenerys arrives in Westeros with 3 dragons, people see her as the return of an ancient force. Some see hope. Others see danger. And House of the Dragon explains why both reactions make sense. Because dragons can bring liberation, but they can also bring destruction. The tragedy of the Targaryens is that they never fully understand the difference. They think controlling dragons means controlling destiny. But history proves that even dragon riders cannot control everything. Another important character connection is Aegon II and the idea of a broken king. In Game of Thrones, many rulers struggle with the reality that wearing a crown does not automatically make someone a great leader. Aegon II represents this perfectly. He does not become powerful because he was prepared to rule. He becomes powerful because circumstances force him into a position of authority. This creates a similar problem we see with many rulers throughout Westeros. The throne does not create greatness. It reveals what was already inside someone. Some people become wiser. Others become cruel. And some completely collapse under the pressure. This is why the Targaryen civil war feels so tragic. The people fighting for control of Westeros are slowly destroying the very thing they want to rule. They are damaging the kingdom they claim they want to protect. And perhaps the biggest mystery that Season 3 could explore is what happens to the idea of Targaryen destiny after the war. For generations, the family believes they are special. They believe their blood gives them a connection to something greater. But after the Dance of Dragons, that belief begins to disappear. The world becomes less magical. The dragons become fewer. The legends become history. And eventually, centuries later, Daenerys is born into a family that has lost almost everything. The girl who dreams of restoring the Targaryen Empire is actually trying to rebuild something that was already broken long before she existed. That is the true tragedy. Daenerys was not bringing back the glory of House Targaryen. She was chasing the memory of something that destroyed itself. And House of the Dragon is showing us exactly why. The Dance of Dragons is not just a war about succession. It is a warning about what happens when people believe they are above consequences. Every character thinks they are fighting for the future, but most of them are actually creating the past that future generations will try to escape. So as Season 3 continues, the biggest question is not whether Rhaenyra or Aegon will win. The bigger question is, after this war ends, will there even be anything left worth ruling? Because the Iron Throne may survive. The kingdoms may survive. But the Targaryen dream of a united Westeros with dragons above it all, that dream is already dying. And the events of this season may reveal the exact moment when the greatest dynasty in Westeros began its slow march toward extinction. Because in the world of Game of Thrones, the most powerful families are rarely destroyed by their enemies. They are destroyed by their own choices.